Good day, everyone. I hope you are all okay, and I hope you can hear me clearly. No, I hope I am audible. And I tried recording our discussion for today because I'm not sure if we can go online, or I'm not sure if everyone can be online today. Not so, but I hope everyone's alright. Despite the weather right now, it's the rainy season, so keep safe, everyone. So for this morning or for this afternoon, we will be discussing about the psychological perspective and the Western and Eastern thought in understanding the South. Right. So I hope you just follow if ever you are um, listening to this video or if you're trying to look at this video. So what you're going to learn is um, all right. By the way, if there are classes that I had before, I was able to discuss this and I wasn't able to finish it. Kindly follow through the discussion until the end because what I'm trying to do right now is to go over the entire lesson so that everyone can catch up and you'll be able to finish the entire module, right? So for our discussion today, here's our learning outcomes. You'll be able to identify and define the concepts of the self as a cognitive construction. We're also going to outline the concepts of the self in Western and Eastern thought, and we're going to recognize how the different psychological concepts and Western and Eastern perspectives influence one's own personality development. So if you can see, there are different influences here in our society today that shape your own personality. So probably later in the next life, you'll be able to understand what is really happening to someone else or to your own self, basically. Well, why do you think is your personality being that way? All right. So moving forward, we'll have here selfhood and personality. This is more on the psychology of identity. So, according to the slide, philosophy tries to answer the question, who am I, from a general point of view of metaphysics and epistemology. Psychology relates the same question to people with thoughts and emotions who are growing up and living in a specific place, entertaining basic values, relating to the other members of society, and having to position themselves in it. So as they grow up, they become competent members of their society by forming an individual identity recognized by others and themselves. So that means um, even if you are living in different places or if you have your own personalities, you are developing your own behaviors. That means when you were when you were brought up, when you were a child up to your adolescent stage, um, you became who you are today because of those influences, whether from your parents, to your family members, to your peers, or to your friends, or other people around you. No? They were the ones who help you shape or identify your own self up to this point. But basically, each individual goes through the developmental stage. No? In psychology, there is what we call the lifespan of a person. So, in a lifespan, from from birth to childhood to school age, play age, or up to the adolescent stage, up to adulthood, and up to the old age, there are different influences that shapes who you are today. And sometimes a self or an individual can actually question, or you're going to ask yourself, who am I? Sino ako? No? So if you try to ponder upon your own self, you're going to ask yourself, who am I? Who am I? What can I contribute? to our society, who made me who I am today. Sometimes those questions can help you identify your own self. And you will realize that whatever that comes into your mind or whatever comes into your heart, basically these things makes makes who you are today. No? And you will still develop that in the near future as you identify yourself or as you journey towards identifying or understanding your own self. Yeah. So that's the beauty of the question, who am I? All right. So moving forward to the next slide. If you happen to know, since we are talking about psychology and we're going to talk about again Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud is one of the philosophers we talk about from our previous lessons, and he is again the father of psychology. No, so he developed theories about the personality and of course also the defense mechanisms. So according to Sigmund Freud, a person has this um three parts of the self: the id, the ego, and the superego. So if you can see, there is an iceberg in the picture. You can see that there is the conscious, the pre-conscious, and the subconscious. So your ego, that means this is the things that um, you know already, or whatever happens, or whatever the things that you decide on, the ego helps you decide morally. No, while the id and the superego, these are part of your subconscious. No, sometimes you don't know what you're doing, or sometimes you're not aware of what you're doing, and your subconscious is embedded in your own self, and that is your id, according to Sigmund Freud. No, so for example, here at the picture, at the left side of the picture, your id says, "I need to eat. I need to eat right this second. Gusto ko magkaon. I want to eat." No, sometimes your subconscious tells you that, no? However, your super ego also tells you you can't do that because you're in the middle of an important meeting. So you cannot eat. So you decided. So once you decided, it's already your ego that decides. I will not eat because I am in a meeting. So something like that. So if you happen to know, again, according to Sigmund Freud, the personality has three parts: the conscious, preconscious, and subconscious. The id, the ego, and the superego. Right. So according to Sigmund Freud also, he developed these defense mechanisms. So we have 12 defense mechanisms according to Sigmund Freud. No? There are 12 or 11, I think. Okay. So um, one of the defense mechanism um, stated by Freud is that a person can use defense mechanisms in times that they needed it. That means these defense mechanisms are also called as coping mechanisms. No? So, for example, we have here compensation. This means to strengthen one or to hide another. No? Um, Defense mechanisms are used when some people are trying to cope with a certain problem, for example, or they are trying to strengthen themselves, or they want to cope or to hide something, or to be aware of something, or to hide the negative feeling from the inside. So sometimes, for example, compensation, strengthen one to hide another. So this is an example like if you're trying to buy something, no? Um, you wanted to buy, for example, a food, no? You wanted to buy a food, and your choices are lechon manok and lechon baboy. However, you're telling yourself that if you're going to buy a lechon baboy, it's going to be costly because the per kilo is already from 800 to 900 per kilo. While if you're going to buy lechon manok, it's more on 200 to 300 plus per one whole manok. So, according to yourself, you chose to buy lechon manok because it is a budget friendly. So you buy the lechon manok because you think it's budget friendly, and so something like that. You compensate one thing over the other because the strength of one is very powerful compared to the other. So we have here another, which is denial. Denial means to refuse to face a negative behavior. So for example, um, okay. So one example is that, hmm, you have for example, for the guys out there, no? This is one thing that can happen to most of the adolescents, for example. So, for example, a guy or an adolescent or a teen courted one girl from the classroom, for example, no? And the one that he courted um denied him. I mean, hambal sang girl, I'm not going to entertain you because of this and that. However, the guy was so furious, no? He cannot accept that he was denied by the girl. So instead of facing the reality of having that negative behavior, he denied that he was denied by the girl. And so sometimes at some point they still become friends and that and that and that. So he denied. So that is a form of denial. No, having to refuse or to face a negative behavior because he doesn't want to feel that negative behavior. That is what you call denial. So another coping mechanism or the defense mechanism is displacement. So you're taking it out on someone else, for example. So one of the example is um again for the guys, for example, if they have problems with their friends or peers, no, or they were very angry already. So when they were very angry, sometimes what they do is they look for a punching bag, no? When they look for a punching bag, it's either they displace it to someone else or they look for a thing that they can punch, no? So that they can take that anger out of themselves. And as you all know, um, displacing your anger to someone else can be very destructive and it's not good. So I suggest that if you're going to displace your anger, make sure that you're going to displace it to a thing, not to a person, because it's not good and it can be very harmful to someone else. And we don't promote that and we don't want that. All right. So I hope class you're still following me. So we also have here introjection. So when we say introjection, this is more on conforming feelings for approval. No, sometimes one of my students told me that it's like looking for validation. Introjection means you're trying to look for approval because um you wanted to validate your own feelings, your own thoughts, or the way you look. You wanted for approval. So sometimes you do this. no? But you're not aware of it. But it can just be a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism because you want it to be validated. All right. We have also another is projection. You see your faults or foibles in others. So projection. So for example, another one of the most common example is that, um, for example, this is only an example. You have your parents, no? Your parents wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer before, no? When they were young, they wanted to be those prominent individuals like lawyers and doctors. However, they were not able to do that. They were frustrated. However, they wanted their children to become like doctors and lawyers. So they project their own frustrations to their children. So sometimes it happens and it can be part of the reality that some of those parents try to project their frustrations to their children. So it is just a defense mechanism, but sometimes you have to understand why it's happening. So that's projection. Another thing is rationalization. So you excuse and justify mistakes. No, so there are people, for example, that they don't know that what they're doing is already wrong. No, they think what they're doing is, instead of thinking it's wrong, they try to think about it as correct, although it's not correct in the eyes of the many people. So they try to rationalize. What do you mean by rationalize? They try to justify that even they're trying to do this and that, they're still correct. They thought they're correct because they're authoritarian. So that happens most of the time when people try to rationalize that their mistakes are correct even if it's not. So the only thing is sometimes they have to do a reality check that whatever they rationalize can be harmful to anyone and it is not healthy for anyone as well. So that happens and it's part of their defense mechanism of someone or a person. We also have here reaction formation, or it means that pretending that you are different. No? So for example, I think I stated this from one section last time that when you are in a group, for example, no, in a group there are different personalities, there are different persons. Sometimes they are your friends and sometimes they're not, but you're trying to do a group work, for example. So when you are trying to do a group work, no, um, there is one of your group mates that were commended because they do such a good work, or they were commended because they were so very naughty, for example. So the reaction of that person or group mate can be a source of their defense mechanism because um when there was a trigger, for example, the reaction was most likely to, or they tend to pretend that they are different among the others. And sometimes it is okay and sometimes it's not. No, but it is somehow a reaction formation within the group itself. We also have here another defense mechanism that can happen. There is regression. So people act much younger to feel better. For example, um, you have at least three or four siblings in the family, and you are already at the age where you have the expectations of that certain age, you know, and you are the youngest, for example, and instead of acting at a certain age, no, the youngest usually tend to regress. They try to act much younger because it for them it feels better, but being at that age, you are expected to be responsible already. So sometimes that is an example of regression. But there are also times that, like for example, if there are people who are already at a certain age or they are already at their old age, you know, it's not regression. Sometimes it's called dementia already. Because old age can be, um, I mean, those being in old age can already um you can already see symptoms of dementia. So sometimes it is also part of regression, and sometimes it can be a symptom of dementia already. All right. So moving forward, we also have here repression. So putting things into darkness. When you say repression, this is more on keeping your feelings, your emotions inside you. No, you don't try to pour it out to other people. You don't pour it to someone. So, like for example, you are angry. No, you are angry. So instead of being angry to someone else or to another or to a friend, you keep it inside. However, when you try to repress and natamaan na siya balakaan, I think, no, natamaan na siya ka keep sa self mo, sometimes you can be a volcano that erupts immediately. Because you try to keep it on yourself and you didn't pour it out. So when that happens, sometimes there is a negative effect because depression can be a source of um emotional outburst, right? So it is a defense mechanism. We also have here ritual and undoing. So when you say ritual and undoing, that means override negative with a habit. So there is a saying that you can actually create a habit in 21 days. That means when you consistently try to do something, in 21 days, you form a habit. So this is more on a ritual in undoing. So sometimes, like example, like in alcoholism or in smoking, when you try to stop or you wanted to change that habit of drinking alcohol or smoking, no, when you try to change it and you wanted to stop in 21 days, not just in 1 day, 2 days, you stop in 21 days, then you form a habit. But this is a form of defense mechanism where you can constantly do something, no? Sometimes this is good when you're changing a negative habit to a positive one. So this is something that people can exercise, especially when you wanted to change a negative behavior into a positive behavior. So that's it for the defense mechanisms. Now, I hope you will learn something from those examples that I um, shared with you, class. So next is that we're going to discuss again Freud's topographical model of the mind. No? So as you can see in this slide, you can see again an iceberg. So on the surface is consciousness, which consists of those thoughts that are the focus of our attention now, and this is seen as the tip of the iceberg. The preconscious consists of all which can be retrieved from memory. The third and most significant region is the unconscious. So here lie the processes that are the real cause of most behavior. So like an iceberg, the most important part of the mind is the part you cannot see. That means your unconscious self. Because your unconscious self is the reason why you are doing so many things. No? Sometimes whatever you project outside your own self, is a reflection of your own unconscious self. Alright? Do you follow, class? No? So again, your unconscious self are things such as fears, your unacceptable sexual desires, violent motives, irrational wishes, immoral urges, selfish needs, shameful experiences, traumatic experience, something that you keep inside yourself. Those are part of your unconscious. And sometimes it can burst out through another form of behavior through your conscious mind. No? And your pre-conscious self, these are memories that were stored over the years. Now, these are memories or knowledge that you had from your previous experiences. So here, the structural model of Sigmund Freud, again, another iceberg that you're going to see in my slides. So the conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg, a small part of a hidden whole. So psychoanalytical theory, which is the theory of Sigmund Freud, is based on the concept that the unconscious mind is structured in three parts: the id, the ego, and superego, which talk to one another to try to resolve conflicting emotions and impulses. So, like for example, your id says this strives for instant gratification. No, it's childlike, impulsive, and hard to reason with. Bigla siya intindihan because it's your id and it's part of your unconscious self. While you have your superego here, it is above your id, and this wants to do the right thing. It is the moral conscience that takes on the role of a strict parent, for example. While your ego, this is the voice of reason negotiating with the id and the superego. Then you have your conscious self. That means your conscious self is the one that decides what you're going to do outside your own inner self. So there you go. We have here in another slide, your unconscious mind also has your dreams. So dreams are unseen as a channel for unconscious thoughts that people cannot usually access because many of them are too disturbing for the conscious mind to cope with. So sometimes, if you can dream, for example, once you dream, whatever you dreamt the night before, sometimes you cannot remember it in the morning, right? And sometimes it can, okay, so again, sometimes your dreams, you cannot remember it already. However, there are times that whatever you dream, no, and you can think about it in the next following days, but in a form of deja vu, or sometimes in a form of parapraxis. Whatever comes to your mind, you think it just happens. Though slip of the tongue, for example. So that's from your unconscious. There's parapraxis or slip of the tongue, or sometimes in the form of deja vu, right? So here, according to William James, we know the meaning of consciousness so long as no one asks us to define it. No? Our conscious self can definitely define who we are. We try to understand our own selves. We try to understand our own selves because we are conscious about who we are based on what we know and who influenced us, whether it's from the culture or from the teachings of others or um, from the upbringing of our parents or the influence of our siblings. So there, we know the meaning of consciousness. So next slide is we have here, according to William James, the me, self, and I self. Now, so me corresponds to the self as an object of experience or self as the object, while the latter means I reflects the self as a subject of experience or self as the subject. So again, the me is a separate individual or a person refers to when talking about their personal experience, while the I is the pure ego. It is what provides continuity between past, present, and future, allowing us to view ourselves to have a consistent individual identity, one brought about by the stream of consciousness that James first defined. No? So me self and I self. So if you try to look at the mirror, no? Sometimes you're going to ask, who am I? I wanted to look at myself. Where will I go for the next 5 years and 10 years from now? So that is yourself. So although the I self cannot be further divided, the me can be further broken down into three subcategories: a material, social, and spiritual self. So the material self consists of what belongs to a person, such as the body, family, clothes, or money, while the social self marks who you are in a specific social situation. We tend to change our actions, thoughts, emotions, words, and mannerisms based on the current social situation of the people with whom we are interacting. Sometimes the social self can vary because there are different types of people that we are interacting with. Sometimes with those people who are in authority, we act ourselves accordingly because they are in authority. While when we are with our peers, sometimes we just act natural because they are our friends or they are just our peers, right? So sometimes the social self is a person in your own body that has different types of scenarios, or I mean, that has different personality when you're trying to interact with one another or with one person to another. But I think that's just normal if you try to understand it very well or you try to understand your own self. So finally, we also have our spiritual self. So our spiritual self is who we are at our core, including our personality, values, and conscience. Our spiritual self typically remains relatively stable throughout our lifetime. So whatever our beliefs are in our spiritual self, this shapes our moral values or moral self, no? Because of the spiritual self. So, there is a psychological differentiation. Psychological differentiation is an important aspect of self development. So, as Dr. Robert Firestone writes in his book, The Self Under Siege, a therapeutic model for differentiation. According to him, in order for people to live their own lives and fulfill their destinies, they must differentiate from destruction. So you should ask yourself, whose life am I really living? Am I basing my life on my own personal beliefs, values, and desires? Because according to um, Dr. Firestone, if you try to differentiate yourself, you'll be able to know who you really are, regardless of the person that influenced you, whether from childhood up to your adolescent stage. No? There is what we call psychological differentiation. That means if you really know who you are, you will know where you stand and where you try to put out yourself in the world. So there are four steps of differentiation. Breaking with destructive thoughts and attitudes towards ourselves that we internalize based on painful early life. So, recognizing and changing negative personality traits in ourselves that are an incorporation of the negative traits of our parents, caregivers, or other influential figures. Or you can also look into the psychological defenses we develop as an adaptation to the pain and distress we experience growing up, and also developing our own values, ideals, and beliefs rather than automatically accepting the beliefs that we grew up with. So these are the four steps of differentiation. If you know these things, you will know why you think you are different from other people. So we also have here the meaning of self-concept and school performance. No? So there are three components of self-concept. So this embodies the answer to the question, who am I? Sino ka? Sino ako? No? Again, your self-image, your ideal self, and your self-esteem. So self-concept, the meaning of it is generally thought of as our individual perception of our behavior, abilities, unique characteristics, a mental picture of who you are as a person. This is what you think who you are. This is this is your own understanding of your own self. This is what self-concept means. So in psychology, the term self-esteem is used to describe a person's overall subjective sense of personal worth or value. In other words, how much you appreciate and like yourself. Now, the more you like yourself, the more you have a positive outlook, or your self esteem is greater than what you think because you love yourself, you like yourself. So, according to Albert Bandura, self efficacy is the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the courses of action required to manage your own selves. So, if you think you are happy with your life or contented with what you have already, whatever your beliefs are and what you think you feel confident about yourself, your self-esteem is definitely higher compared to those who are, for example, who are very shy, no? For those who do not think they can speak with other people or in a group, that means they have low self-esteem. But however, if they try to cope with that, or they can actually practice, huh, their self-esteem will definitely become higher. But of course, they have to first understand that you have to embrace who you are in order for you to learn that your ability to make something different, no, means trying to accept yourself first of who you are today. Because after that, you will learn that if you know who you are today, you will bring that in your future. So we also have here the multiple versus unified selves by David Lester. So according to him, the unified self is a means of referring to the composite persona or to the self that contains all of the other personas that exist within a person's life. Unified meaning composite that contains all of the other personas. We also have the multiple selves or multiple personas refers to the different ways that individuals interact with different situations and circumstances in their lives. Meaning, sometimes kuno, there are a person can be in a different situation, whether it's a good or bad situation. So in those situations, sometimes the person um can have different ways of coping. So in those different ways of coping, sometimes a person can develop a self that is different from their old self. So sometimes it's agang balang sa katao that I am a new self because, or I am in my new self because I experienced this and that. No? So that's according to David Lester. There is the multiple and the unified selves. No? And it happens naturally, and sometimes it can happen in reality. So we have also here the true versus false selves. So this psychological theory of the true and false self is the work of one with the 20th century's greatest thinkers, the English psychoanalyst and child psychiatrist Donald Winnicott. No? You have your true versus your false selves. So the healthy false self is described as one which allows someone to be functional in society. That means a person can be in his false self because he wanted to function very well in society. That means he can interact with others, interact with different types of people. So the unhealthy false self comes from the same origins as the healthy false self. However, for our long-term well-being, the effects of the unhealthy false self are quite different to those of its counterpart. Well, sometimes there is also the unhealthy effect because once you embrace this kind of false stuff of yours, no, because you try to put out an identity um away from your own true self. Sometimes you embrace that false self and you forgot that you have your true self from before. So what to do is sometimes is you have to learn between or you try to understand how you're going to interact with other people. No? If you try to understand that am I being my own true self while I am interacting with other people or am I being my false self? Because if you're being in your false self, sometimes what happens is that there is a negative effect that differentiates your own self identity, no, because you forgot your own true self. And it can happen. But if you try to understand it, sometimes you can intervene. All right. So moving forward. No? So the self in Western and Eastern thought, no? So I think this is the part where some of the class were not able to have when we were discussing about the self. So the self in Western and Eastern thought, an individualist is motivated by personal rewards and benefits. So individualist persons set personal goals and objectives based on self. Individualistic workers are very comfortable working with enough autonomy. Okay. So the collectivist naman is motivated by group goals. Long-term relationships are very important and collectivistic persons easily sacrifice individual benefit or praise to recognize and honor the team's success. So in fact, being singled out and honored as an individual from the rest of the team may be embarrassing to the collectivistic. And there is what we call the individualists and the collectivists. So again, the individualist naman or individualistic workers are very comfortable working with autonomy and not part of a team. Meaning, kaya niya nga maging siya lang. Kaya niya mag-isa. He can do the work on his own. While in collectivists, again, they are motivated with group goals. They can work with a group, but being singled out and honored as an individual from the rest of the team, maybe for him it can be very embarrassing because he or she thought that the work was done by a group. So it doesn't mean that if he or she is being praised as an individual, as part of the group, maybe what he thought is it can be embarrassing for him. So again, collectivism is more of those people, I mean, are more of those who thinks about the group itself. While for the individualistic kind of person, he thinks of himself. So, so Western and Eastern thought, we have the individualist and collectivist. So, the Western thought, according to Rene Descartes, again, one of the philosophers that we discussed from our previous lessons, according to Rene Descartes is regarded as one of the founders of modern epistemology. Now, in his method, the first reality discovered is the thinking self. His view of the thinking self or the thinking thing is that of a separate and individual self with a rational mind. So he argues that an objective, ego-oriented world of meaning allows the individual to be rational. His view on an atomistic view of the self does not include a person's social or relational nature. So, si Rene Descartes, Cartesian siya. And and according to him, again, I think therefore I am. I am who I am. So that's according to Rene Descartes. We also have the Eastern thought, which is more on the teachings of Confucius, Buddha, or the Buddhism, or Hinduism, and Taoism. So, see Confucius. He explained that there are six virtues and six accompanying failures. No? Confucius is one of the Chinese philosophers. No? If you can happen or if you can check out his previous life on the internet, probably you will be able to know that Confucius um really had an influence in the world today. Not just in the Chinese or for the Chinese, but in even in the Western world, his influences really became part of um the culture of people. So for him, so first, there is the mere love of morality. That alone without culture degenerates into fatuity. And second, there is the mere love of knowledge. That alone without culture tends to dilettantism. And thirdly, there is the mere love of honesty. That alone without culture produces heartlessness. And fourthly, there is the mere love of uprightness. That alone, without culture, leads to tyranny. Fifthly, there is the mere love of courage. That alone, without culture, produces recklessness. And sixth, there is the mere love of strength of character. That alone, without culture, produces eccentricity. Yeah, that's according to Confucius. No? We had the six virtues and six accompanying failures. So, first virtue is that the love of morality, and the failure is it degenerates into fatuity. The second is the love of knowledge, and the failure is dilettantism. And another virtue is the love of honesty, and without culture, kuno, according to him, is it produces heartlessness. Next is the love of uprightness. That alone, without culture, leads to tyranny. Next is the love of courage. So without culture, again, it produces recklessness. And six, without the love of strength of character or without culture, it produces eccentricity. So that's according to Confucius. So we also have here Buddha's doctrine is derived from experience in the transformations of consciousness and the stages of meditation, not from sense perception or logical operation. But the implications of Buddhism are to emphasize compassion for others and conduct ourselves with restraint out of a sense of responsibility. So, si kay Buddha naman, this is more on a form of meditation. And once we meditate, we try to know ourselves when we try to understand ourselves when we try to learn it from meditation. So we have also here Hinduism, hmm, Hindus believe that an individual's action, which is they call karma, there is the bad or good actions that the individual performed in a previous life determines his or her caste. Well, there is the good and the bad karma according to Hinduism. So Hinduism is concerned with the spiritual essence of the self. So this transcendence of self is seen as essential to spiritual liberation. So sometimes I think it is believed that in Hinduism, if you did good in your previous life, you're going to be reincarnated into someone who can also do good. While if you did bad in your life before in your previous life, you're going to be reincarnated into something. So I think that is the belief of karma. There is the good and bad karma. So something that um if you did a bad action, it turns out to be bad again. No? If you did something good, you're going to reap a good karma or a good action as well. So we have another Taoism. So in Taoism, the relativity of opposites is present in other aspects of the universe, such as such as the yin and yang. Yin is all that is feminine, gentle, dark, and weak, while yang is all that is masculine, forceful, light, and active. So yin and yang exist in a mutual relationship and reinforce each other. So life arises from death and vice versa. So in Taoism, self does not exist without the existence of the other. So that is why there is the concept of the yin and yang. Because if you cannot have the yin, that means yourself doesn't exist without the yang. So self as a separate identity is supported by the equal and opposite sensations of otherness, such as the dialectical relationship between the yin and the yang. No? As you can see, the yin and the yang, there is the black and the white. So the other self cannot exist without the other. So that is the belief of the Taoist. So I think that is the last slide for my presentation. So I believe that the activity that we had, I think I gave you an activity that you have to put your idol in a bond paper, no? The idol whom you think who is beautiful for you, you have to um put it in a short size bond paper, and hopefully if we can go back to our face-to-face classes, we will be able to discuss that. So in the meantime, since I am done with my discussion, yeah, I am done with my slides for the psychological perspectives and the Western and Eastern thought. What you're going to do right now, since you have your bond papers with you with the picture of your idols, kindly describe, no? Describe that person on your bond paper, no? Kindly define what is beauty, no? Put that in your bond paper. Define what is beauty and kindly explain why the person why the person that you put on your bond paper is the person whom you think that is beautiful. I mean, why is that person is beautiful for you? So again, kindly define beauty and state why is that person beautiful for you. All right. So I think that would be all for today, for today's discussion. So if you wanted to check out, I mean, if you have any questions, kindly put your questions in our Google Classroom. And if you want to clarify something, you can also comment it in our Google Classroom. so that we can adjust it as a class. And if you wanted to check out our discussion for today, you can go back to this video anytime, no? So I hope class you have a very fruitful session for today, since I hope I was able to discuss this kind of lesson to you. So I hope to see you in class soon. So that would be all. Thank you everyone. See you soon.